for all the hundreds of people who have been traced currently, it's only one who had tested positive out of that contamination bracket, and that one forms part of this 4. So again, the data analysis by the experts raises the question that do you really have such huge elements in your population that you intend to, if you will follow the advice of some persons, lock down everything in search of some elements that may actually not be there. Elements who, even if they came in from the 3rd, have already done about 2 weeks with nothing showing that they had any challenge whatsoever. So all of these are the factors that, go into deciding on such a situation. But as the President mentioned, all of these are being considered, and in due course the decision will be made.
I noticed that a lot of emphasis is being placed on the data, the information that we have at the moment from the cases that we know. It makes me wonder about what we don't know and how much we are factoring that in. At the moment, Ghana is not doing social distancing very well. People are congregating, and it's difficult for the enforcement of the president's directives to go down to the ground, which means that since we are not yet testing, there is a chance that we may have some numbers of people out there who are affected but are not showing symptoms yet are spreading it. How much of that is being factored into the decision making at the moment?
A lot of it is being factored into the decision making at the moment, and I'll say 2 things. First is why we are putting a lot of emphasis on the data. We're putting a lot of emphasis on the data because with a pandemic this nature, you need to follow the science and the data. The decisions don't have to be made out of panic or out of emotions, or simply also because we have seen a particular method used in a particular jurisdiction. The decisions have to be country-specific, but following the science and the data. Now, to the specific question of what don't we know and how much of it are we factoring into our decisions, we extrapolate from the about 970 contacts who have been identified and traced to answer the question, what don't we know? Because if you want to extrapolate about the real risk out there in the community, your best bet currently is to look at those who went out there, those persons they engaged with who have been contact traced, and how many of them really have contracted this. So you'll find out that as at the last, we put out 970 contacts were identified and traced. Out of them, like I'm saying to you, 1 out of 970 is the one who tested positive. Indeed, currently, over 200 and something of them have finished their 14-day period, so that even if you haven't tested them, they have finished their 14 days, and therefore you are getting close to sure that nothing untoward in their system.
Is that accurate though? They may have been asymptomatic, yet in 14 days may have infected. I think it's about 3,000 people or 30,000 people that one person can infect within a 2-week period. Yeah. So even though they are asymptomatic, they could still be spreading it.
Yes, that is correct. Could. So then you ask yourself, so assuming that somebody has been infected, for all of this pool and the subsequent people they are also tracing, why are they not finding any such person? So then it leads you to do that extrapolation.
Isn't it because you're not testing them?
No, they are testing them. That's what I'm saying. That if you look at the numbers that have been tested so far, later this morning we would update the data. There's a very aggressive testing exercise going on. Now, it is not just a testing of persons who have traveled in and are in quarantine. It is also a testing of these contacts, as well as a testing of persons, several other persons who are of the view that, they have traveled into the jurisdiction, etc., or they have, some conditions that they believe they should be tested. So our testing is no longer like the very beginning, which was just about people who are simply symptomatic or symptomatic simpliciter. So here's what I'm saying. We're not dismissing the potential risk out there will be the last persons to do so. But I'm explaining that these are some of the analysis that they do to come to that view, and they factor it into it. And in the end, if they come to the decision that you need to have a lockdown of some sort before you can test, because as I've mentioned, a lockdown alone without any aggressive test protocol is just a 2-week delay. By the time you open up, you still get back to ground zero. So the real focus is the aggressive testing module, which is what the president has instructed must take place. All persons who came in from about a third would have to have an opportunity to test such persons, because that is the real risk pool, and then the persons they've been in contact with. But again, as they analyze the data, they also raise the questions of, well, how far should you go? Somebody came in from the 3rd, and today is the 27th or so. You are expecting that this person would either have exhibited symptoms or engaged with somebody who by now should be also exhibiting symptoms. And if that's far you are not having any of these numbers, then really how much of that pool? So all of these are the analysis. It's a very complex thing, but I think gradually we are getting to a conclusion point, and that decision should be made shortly.
Right. Help me understand the picture here. Before we started receiving donations from Jack Ma, about 20,000 testing kits and so forth, how many test kits did we have as a nation at the beginning of this?
I mean, I think the first time we had about the first 1,500 came in from, I think, the WHO or the World Bank support, and then they went up to another 2,000 and then another 5,000 before our instruction to ramp up testing for the procurement of some 50,000 test kits, which instruction was given, and I think by this weekend, stocks of that 50,000 test kits should be coming into town. And then now you have what has also come from the Jack Ma Foundation. So then you're going to be hitting maybe somewhere around 70,000 for this first cohort. It is my understanding that we intend to bring in a lot more test kits, because the answer is not even just in a lockdown. It's about test aggressively.
It seems to me, and I'm happy to be corrected, but it seems to me that government is leaning towards the preference of South Korea, test, rather than a lockdown. Is that fair?
All cards are on the table, as I've repeated over and over again. The countries that have been successful in flattening the curve very quickly, South Korea, I think Japan, and a few of those countries, you can also check the literature from these countries. They have been heavy on testers. Indeed, for many of them, they didn't even have to do a lockdown. They were more focused on the testers. For countries that have just had to do a lockdown, but have not had an aggressive testing regime, you are not necessarily, well, many of the lockdowns are not over, but you are not necessarily seeing a conclusion that a lockdown on its own without more bears the fruits of what we are looking. It may stop spread, but if you don't find the persons by the time you open up, you will now just have delayed the process. So in considering all the options, the view is to examine what do you do when you lock down generally to manage things, but most importantly, what do you do in a lockdown to ensure that you go after the virus and nip it in the bud? Those are the considerations.
Right. Now, when you talk about the countries that have been able to turn things around, they made decisions early. South Korea started testing very, very early. Mass testing, drive-through testing, and so forth. The countries that have suffered have made decisions late. Now, if you look at what we've done here in Ghana, over the weekend, we stopped 2 days' worth of, travel, if you will, and quarantined them, tested them, and we are seeing huge numbers. But we've had this problem for much longer than 2 days. Are we not grossly underestimating the number of cases that may have come through, even in the few days before the shutdown of our borders?
No, we don't intend to underestimate. That is exactly why we have decided to go back to everybody who came in from the Fed and test.
Is that testing decision not coming a bit late, though?
Oh, of course not. It's not. I mean, if you raise the questions of South Korea, etc., you have to now start off by asking, for example, when did they record their first case? Where were the peaks in the world at the time? What did they do about travel from the peaks in the world at the time? And when did they start their aggressive testing? And then finally, what was the science they were using for their aggressive testing? Were they using RDTs because they had the genetic formulations for South Koreans that they could use RDTs? Were they using PCIs? Were they using PCR? All of that is proper analysis you have to do. And then you juxtapose that with our context. When did we drop flights from about 7,000 per day to about a little around 2,000 per day? That was as far back as the 15th, if I'm correct. When did we shut our borders? Because, by even dropping down the traffic from about 7,000 to about 2,000, yes, it wasn't zero. But our risk, particularly from the countries which were epicenters at that time, was significantly reduced. When we said we would not allow persons from the Chinese jurisdiction to come into Ghana as far back as then, when China was the epicenter, we cut back on a lot of potential risk into the Ghanaian jurisdiction. So we don't intend to underestimate. We are just making sure that the decisions that we make are not emotional or rash decisions. They are well thought through, considered from all the perspectives. I think we're close to a decision point. And so far, decisions have served us well. We thank the people of Ghana, the media, and everybody for their support. These final raft of measures should be comprehended so that we nip it in the bud, and that's what the president intends to do.
Right. Now, about the contact tracing, I'm curious about something. We're currently tracing about 900 and something contacts from what you explained. However, we have about 50-something cases that were from the local monitoring. And then another 70, is it 72 from 78. The 78? Thank you, 78 from the mandatory quarantine.
Yeah.
Now, as we understand from the WHO, in 2 weeks, one person can infect about 30,000 people. So, if for the numbers we have, you only have 900 contacts that you are tracing, haven't we missed perhaps quite a large number?
If indeed you have missed a large number, it should begin to show up at least in the 900. And that's why these percentages matter, because there are relativities involved. Even for the 940 that you have reached, the pattern should begin to show even within this 940. So within the 940, if you have one testing positive, you can extrapolate to this potential 30,000 and begin to have a view of how much risk you have out there. But the contact tracing still continues. Indeed, some more technology is being rolled or has been rolled into the contact tracing. A bit of it may require some legal powers under the emergency powers that have been given the president by Parliament. And should he activate that, it should help us to maybe go a bit further in the contact tracing, where you can actually begin to geolocate people who still may even be off, even though they've given you the data and their phones are off and they are somewhere in the hinterland. You should be able to then, by geolocation, reach them and ask them to come forward for the necessary testing. So we don't intend to underestimate. We are doing everything that ought to be done to ensure that a proper blanket is put around the threat and nips it in the bud.
Yesterday, there was an announcement that the president has pardoned about 808 prisoners. As we understand it, about 797 of them will end up being released. The rest will remain in prison. Can we expect more? Because the congestion is nowhere near solved, even though 808 will be leaving. The
Minister for the Interior, upon the instructions of the President, worked with the prison service to come to a certain view on how to provide some relief within the prisons, especially at this time of risk. This is the recommendation that came in, which recommendation has been acted upon with dispatch by His Excellency the President. If it becomes necessary that any further actions are taken in that space, it will be done. You have to balance whatever decisions you make in that space with the risk to the population. You also don't say that just merely because you want to reduce the risk in the season, you are going to, at this stage, give pardon to persons whose criminal offenses and whose criminal profile makes them an even bigger risk to the community. Else, out of fear, We have now also released some persons into the community who will become a further danger to the community as we go along. So all of these decisions, like I mentioned, ought not to be made out of fear. They have to be made with hard science, hard, very deep, careful, complex analysis. And then you find that optimal point. And we thank the teams of advisors that are assisting in getting all of those decisions right. This is the number that has been decided as optimal at this point in time. If it becomes necessary to amend that, the president will do so.
Okay, just before you go, if I may ask one more question. I want to read to you a tweet from the United Nations. This is what it says. We are at war with the virus and not winning it. It took the world 3 months to reach 100,000 confirmed cases. The next 100,000 happened in just 12 days. The third took 4 days. The fourth, 1.5 days. This war needs a wartime plan to fight it. Mr. Oppong-Nkrumah, is the Ghana government implementing a wartime plan against the coronavirus yet?
I should maybe invite you to the Emergency Operations Center so that you see the doctors, the national security persons, the food security persons, the human security persons, the public health persons, the military persons, the commander-in-chief himself of the Ghana Armed Forces, who are sitting around the table literally every evening at 6 p.m. to examine where we are in this battle and the kind of steps we need to take. Remember that as far back, even before the 5th of March, when many countries had not really taken this serious, President Akufo-Addo had started engaging on this matter and had already started promoting the preventive etiquette that needed to be put in place. Right from then, we have started operating what you will describe as a wartime plan to ensure that we get all the elements together within our context and get it right. Just a couple of days ago, the Ghana Armed Forces themselves directly involved in coming in to ensure, because at first, for example, the Ghana Health Service was using its own distribution mechanism to try and get materials on the ground. We had to escalate, bringing in the Ghana Armed Forces, the Air Force, to help us move some of the logistics to other parts of the country. So that's how dead serious this is being taken from the very top. And together we are optimistic that we will be successful in this enterprise.
Mr. Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah, I thank you for your time with us this morning.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, there you go. It's 2 minutes to 8. You've just heard the Information Minister walk you through the thinking of government around the options available at this point in this coronavirus outbreak. But we're going to extend this conversation because those options each have implications. Many are calling still for a lockdown, that it is the only option. Well, is that the case? Is that true? What would be the implications of it? We're going to break it down. We're going to talk about each area of our lives that could be affected by any action taken by government, including a lockdown. So we'll think about the economic implications, the health implications, the security implications, and how it will affect our daily lives. Will they be permanent effects, or will they change the way we act as humans forever? Our first guest, is seated. You'll be hearing in just a moment from her. Dr. Abena Sumeni-Ntwi is a health economist, a human rights advocate. She specializes in policy analysis and healthcare access. She's the executive director of Angel Zoe Foundation. She's a friend of the show. It's nice to see her this morning. How are you? Okay, she whispered fine. I believe her. You'll hear more from her when we come back, right here on the Super Morning Show. Stay with us.